Russell Wilson denying trade packages that were already done deals between the Eagles and the Commanders earlier in this offseason. Of course, we saw Russell Wilson get traded to the Denver Broncos for the insane haul, sign the insane amount of money with Denver, and ultimately win 5 games, go 5-12, and have the worst the worst game. Lord, not even the worst game, the worst season of his career. And we know everyone's calling Russell Wilson washed. He's done for. People think he's not going to come back, even with their offseason with the Sean Payton hire. So let's dig into this a little bit. And again, the Eagles and the Washington Commanders had trades in place for Russell Wilson from the Seattle Seahawks. Russell Wilson had a no trade clause inside of his contract with Seattle. Not many people in the NFL, let alone in history, have had that granted to them. I think Deshaun Watson and Lamar Jackson are the two off the top of my head that I know have a no trade clause within their contract. Russell Wilson denied the two of them, decided to go to Denver. Guess he saw brighter days with the rookie head coach and Nathaniel Hackett, of course, OC coming over from the Packers. There was Javonte Williams. There was Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton. The O-line wasn't necessarily the greatest, but a lot of people thought Russell Wilson to the Broncos was going to be the great move. Hindsight 2020, they didn't do their due diligence on Russ, and essentially he didn't pass inspection with only winning 5 games. So then you want to take a look at the Eagles, right? And this is really funny how this news breaks and how this unfolds, because we know the Eagles have now realized who Jalen Hurts is, what he's able to do. We saw what he did last season, MVP run, and, in the Super Bowl. But we had talks about when the Eagles drafted him. Carson Wentz was still in a big contract. Now, yes, he was hurt, but he went late in the NFL draft. It didn't look like the Eagles were maybe even going to use him at quarterback at all. I literally remember talks about people modeling people were saying that the Eagles could potentially model Jalen Hurts' play style after Taysom Hill with the New Orleans Saints, which I thought was absolutely crazy because I knew Jalen Hurts was a dog. He was an absolute competitor, and he could play football at the college level, at the professional level. So we've had the conversations of Philadelphia not having that faith in Jalen Hurts and not really knowing how to use him. And I remember being on this Justin Sports show before I relaunched the show here with you guys. Hurts finally figure out how to elevate or something to that. So did Jalen Hurts finally figure out how to use the weapons that Philadelphia has given him? And I said, no, Philadelphia finally learned how to build around and use Jalen Hurts. That's why they went to a Super Bowl and essentially lost a shootout against the Kansas City Chiefs. So that shows you that Philadelphia, literally before the MVP run and before the Super Bowl loss with the shootout, everything that Jalen Hurts did this year, they were willing to make him a second string quarterback to Russell Wilson. Now, Russell Wilson hadn't lost 5 games yet. Russell Wilson hadn't only won 5 games, in a season yet, like he did with the Broncos, losing 12. He didn't look that bad. People really were saying that Russell Wilson, it was the Seahawks that were holding him back. Pete Carroll wasn't letting Russ cook. Pete Carroll being the defensive-minded head coach, not helping Russell Wilson out with weapons. Yes, they had DK Metcalf, and of course they bring in Kenneth Walker, who looked great behind Geno Smith. But now, again, we see the Eagles, they didn't have that faith in Jalen Hurts. They were willing to make Russell Wilson the starter over him. And I guess I can't necessarily blame them, because at that time, Russell Wilson had showed us more than Jalen Hurts did. But it was also a double-edged sword, because I knew Jalen Hurts was capable of being QB1. This season just showed all of us that. But it took a while for really everyone to see it and for the Eagles to believe in it and make it happen. So that shows the Eagles had really no belief in Jalen Hurts before this year, which, again, is baffling knowing what I've believed and know about Jalen Hurts. But they didn't buy into him, and you don't know until you know. Makes sense for Washington, right, to have been in on this deal. Ron Rivera, not a great head coach. They didn't have Eric Bieniemy like they do now. I mean, could you just have imagined if Russell Wilson goes to Washington? He does have that talent on the offensive and defensive side of the ball. And I guess in a way too, right, that you could compare the rosters of the Washington Commanders and the Seattle Seahawks at the time, because neither one of them were necessarily stacked, had a few players on both sides of the ball, clearly Pete Carroll over Ron Rivera. So Russell Wilson going to Washington, and I see why he turned that down. But Russell Wilson going to Washington, I'm proud of Washington for being in on that bid. I'm proud of them for wanting to chase a quarterback like Russell Wilson. I guess I would have liked to know what the money or what the contract would have been like for Russell Wilson to go over there, but I'm not going to, rag on Washington for them going to get Russell Wilson. Eric Bieniemy, could you imagine if Eric Bieniemy was now the offensive coordinator and the soon-to-be head coach for Russell Wilson? That's essentially how that would have played out. So that would have been crazy just to see the NFL play out in that way. But now looking at this situation, you have to open your mind to, would Russ really have been more effective with Philly or Washington compared to how the season turned out with the Denver Broncos? I'm going to say it was 50% Russell Wilson's fault, 50% Nathaniel Hackett's fault. Some people might go in and say 70% Russ, 30% Nathaniel Hackett. Not really sure which way you want to cut it. But when I went back and looked at the tape, the Broncos, shout out Theo Ash, the Broncos were drawing up really, really sound plays for Russell Wilson. He had his protection. He was holding the football for very long. He was perceiving pressure that wasn't there, kind of like he would do in the later seasons with Seattle. And we were like, what is Russell Wilson doing? You've just played at an MVP level for 10, 11, 12 weeks, but now the last 3 weeks of how you played have completely knocked you out of contention. We saw that frequently from Russell Wilson in Denver. So, for him to now have posed with this Philly situation, okay, let's look at it. Nick Sirianni, would we take him over Nathaniel Hackett? Yeah, probably so, because he had Jalen Hurts play against the Bucs in the playoffs in a close game. Of course, they lost. And then the second year, Nick Sirianni takes him to the Super Bowl after butchering the press conference. I will never, ever forget that press conference that Nick Sirianni gave us shortly after he was hired by the Philadelphia Eagles. But, okay, so Nick Sirianni over Nathaniel Hackett, right? Do we believe that Russell Wilson would have plugged in better over a Jalen Hurts, knowing that the talent that was around Russ? I can't confidently say that. I don't believe Russell Wilson, not even just because he went 5-12. Well, I can't rightfully say that, because he did just go 5-12, and I watched the tape and I realistically saw that it was someone Russell Wilson. He could have done the same thing with Sirianni. Yeah, maybe he would have had an easier schedule. I should have went back and seen, okay, what was the strength of schedule for Denver versus what it would have been for Philly and now Washington, in 2022. But either way, I didn't pull that up. That really would have helped kind of justify this here. But yeah, and being more successful with Washington, don't necessarily see that being a thing either, because you're gonna have Ron Rivera, not better than Nick Sirianni. Maybe you would have taken him over Nathaniel Hackett, but Nathaniel Hackett had a true stinker because he was that OC for Aaron Rodgers. I mean, we literally saw what he did with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. He goes now to be the OC with the Jets, and that's where Aaron Rodgers ends up going. For after the trade for Green Bay. So there was a lot of great belief in Nathaniel Hackett, but he ended up not playing out well. So maybe you would have taken Ron Rivera over Hackett, but Ron Rivera overall, I love what he's done. Players coach, kind of turned around Washington, definitely turned around Carolina, took him to a Super Bowl, had the one-loss season, MVP in Cam Newton. So I've got my respect and I've given the flowers to Ron Rivera, but I don't know if he would have really been able to actually hold down a Russell Wilson. But y'all get in the chat, which I believe y'all already have, so I'm about to tune in there. Get in the comments. Let me know your thoughts on this Russell Wilson trade that he turned down from the Eagles, from the Washington Commanders. Of course, he goes on to play for the Broncos, goes 5-12, major trade package, major money. And as I talked about on a recent show, the Broncos are potentially looking into a exit strategy for Russell Wilson if he doesn't play good again this year. Michael Darby, couldn't agree with you more. Eagles dodged a bullet, in my opinion. Yeah, they did. I think that would have really ruined the structure of the team. Jalen probably would take another 2 years from this season to have the season he just had last year, because of how they probably would have had to. Well, I mean, I don't know. If you think about it, I was going to say retool the offense. If you think about it, Russell Wilson and Jalen Hurts kind of have the similar play style. And I don't believe that, Jalen Hurts is kind of believed in and trusted and drafted being a smaller quarterback without Russell Wilson. So I could say that their play style is, excuse me, is very similar.